Political nut, I've been in danger of getting dangerously overexcited when I picked up the front pages this morning. There's the Sunday Telegraph. The Tories on the brink of imploding over Brexit. A huge row inside the party could tear them apart. The Sunday Times has a fascinating story which it calls a very British coup about a plot between Remainers, mainly in the Tory party, and the Speaker to take away control from the government over the agenda of the House of Commons. Very important. We'll be talking about that later on. The Mail on Sunday has a similar story. Bercow's secret kill Brexit plot with Tory saboteur. Not hard to see which side they're on. And the Observer there, Labour set to trigger a vote to topple May government about a possible election vote coming very, very shortly indeed. And finally, the Prime Minister herself writing in the Sunday Express, back my deal or face catastrophe, she says. Hyperbole on all sides. We'll avoid hyperbole, I'm sure. Let's start with the front page of the Sunday Times, Katie. You've been inside the machine. Let's just talk about what this actually means, because in one way it seems quite technical. It's a plot between the Speaker, it says, and Tory rebels so that backbenchers can initiate legislation, not just the government. Why is that so important?
It's quite a significant moment in terms of where we go in future in terms of our political system and the way that the executive rules overall the legislature. And what we look at this story and we think to ourselves this morning is that Tim Shipman has exposed a plot where backbenchers want to take over Parliament, where Brexit might not happen, there might be a delay to Article 50. It says here that Downing Street shell-shocked and it could be game over for Brexit entirely. Because
I've always thought, and people say the Commons is against no deal, the Commons will stop no deal happening, that this must be nonsense, because actually only the government can stop no deal happening, because no deal is enshrined in legislation, in law, and to prevent to amend one law, you have to have another law, and only the government can introduce law. But this would allow backbenchers to initiate their own legal process.
And what nobody seems to know, and I've asked several people this, is there a difference between no deal and actually just crashing out? Because if you just crash out, then you don't need the say-so of Parliament, do you? You just run out of time and you fall out of
As things stand, we leave the EU at the end of March, come what may. The clock is ticking, it's in the law, and it can't be stopped unless the law is changed. And this would allow MPs to change the law. It's an extraordinary plot, Paul. It's all about the Chief Whip skulking around it's a cloakroom and daggers. Cloakroom and dagger plot.
What he heard was a political horror to compare with any Victorian Gothic novel. Well, to the extent that this is true, and I think it's slightly overwritten, slightly overbriefed by Number 10 here, but to the extent that it's true, it means there are two outcomes next week if May loses the vote. One is that Jeremy Corbyn launches and wins a no-confidence motion and Theresa May's government falls. The other is that MPs take control of the government. Now, that itself leads to a second election, because you can't permanently have, say, the Foreign Office diplomats saying to Greece or Italy, we'll just find out what the Commons thinks about things. You know, the government has to run the country. The Commons can't itself run it without an executive.
Let's just sit back a little bit. In historic terms, this is remarkable. We haven't seen anything like this since Cromwell's age, really. The Commons literally, 1940.
May 1940. It's, without the formalities, this is what people did to Chamberlain. They basically, the Tories said, look, you won your vote of confidence, but you can't be the government. Parliament is going to reconfigure the government.
But even then, MPs didn't say, we are going to take back control of what the Commons decides from the executive. I mean, that's something that hasn't happened.
I just think all of these largely Tory MPs that are briefing about this potential split, it's turkeys voting for Christmas. I mean, I think if you go out into the general public now, whether they are Remainers or Brexiteers, the one thing they thought, right, OK, there was a clear mandate here, 17.4 million people. They've turned it into an opaque mess. And actually, whatever they think of Theresa May, they view her as a headmistress trying to rule over a load of unruly school children.
And that is very much the tone of her piece she's written in the Sunday Express. And she said she's talked to 200 people who are against, 200 MPs who are against no deal, and she lays out all the options, and she says this is the most important vote in their lifetimes they'll ever take, and if they get it wrong, there will be absolute chaos.
But she also threatens the possibility of a no deal in there. And the message is coming out from Number 10 in terms of the fact that backbenchers may take control of the situation, and then at the same time threatening no deal. You know, they kind of need to be a little bit more consistent in terms of the message that they are pushing out and they're sticking to. Yeah. But she set out her story in the Sunday Express yet again. It's kind of the paper of choice for her to write her words in recently.
Now, Paul, outrageously suggested that the Sunday Times story might have been briefed by Number 10 in part. And you're not the only person saying that. Very interesting tweet from the Tory MP and Remainer Anna Soubry this morning. She says, Number 10's engaged in nasty smear tactics against Dominic Grieve, and she finishes, fake news. Now, it's certainly the case that this is the kind of story that will help Theresa May rally wobbling MPs, won't it? It is possible this week she'll win her vote.
I mean, I do actually feel quite sorry for Theresa May with everything that she's trying to deal with. And here we have Mail on Sunday, page 2. They've done these sort of bullet points that they like, you know, crisis Foreign Office meetings, Jeremy Corbyn's senior advisors at war over Article 50, blah. And then right at the end it says, Heidi High Star Sue Pollard confronts Mrs May at Number 10 party over her Brexit strategy. So when Peggy the chambermaid is having a go at you, look, it says here, she was at a do at a reception for Tory MPs and friends, and Wolf whistled the PM and started to berate her over Brexit, which led to some people with her going in the door of Number 10. It said some people saying, "What next? Timmy Mallet, Home Secretary." I think we could be at that point.
It's a funny country we live in.
She's not going to win that vote. What isn't in the Sunday papers is a gambit from Brussels. There is a bit of noise about it, but if there was going to be a big gambit from Brussels that allows her to win the vote, you'd hear about it this morning. They need at least 48 hours. I think she's going to lose that vote, and you know we then see. So you've got Vince Cable on later, and in the Times we've also got this. Cable offers Number 10 deal to Corbyn. Now this is significant because you've already had the SNP and Plaid Cymru coming to the Norway position. You know, basically saying Labour do a Norway and then we'll put you in power. If Cable is saying, and he's on later, we'll find out that he's prepared to either supply in confidence or even vote for a Labour government. That's very interesting. But the poll that goes with it, again, we've got 43% of people saying if May loses the vote, they want a second referendum. Big issue for Corbyn, as you'll see, and 37 saying no deal. So I read
the
this
middle ground has fallen away completely.
Politics is polarising, and you know we view from afar America, where politics has become really about mobilising a cultural base. And Jeremy Corbyn this week trying to say, look, we can paper over the divides between Tottenham and Wakefield, as I think he tries to say. I wish we could. I hope we can. But my fear is that what polls like that tell you is that politics after this week might be about a culture war between progressive and nationalist
and
people.
The country is divided over Brexit. Brexit has...
Well, if I was Theresa May, I wouldn't be writing in the Express. Theresa May needs to be writing in the Independent, the Guardian, the I newspaper.
Or even the Mirror.
To the people who... She needs to be doing what Corbyn tried to do, trying to, at the last gasp, trying to bring the country again together about something.
Well, you talk about everything being polarised, and it's true. And I think a lot of the media coverage now has become very opinion-driven, which is why I think this piece on 6 and 7 of The Observer is very good, because it's actually a very measured piece on all of the options that could happen if Theresa May loses on the vote on Tuesday. You know, what will happen? Parliament could take back control, or if she heads back to Brussels, a no confidence vote in the government. Yep. And it sets it all out in a very measured and I think, you know, well explained, calmed way. Similarly, David Wooding in The Sun on Sunday has kind of made it more populist, but it's fundamentally the same thing. He's done it like a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire question. Will she phone a friend or ask the audience with the 4 different options? But at the very end, he says, if anyone tells you they know the answer to the biggest question in politics, they're lying.
I think that's a very fair point.
It'd be really interesting to hear from some people today in terms of the Brexit Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, indeed what is next. Do we go through a number of votes in Parliament so that we can have consensus on something?
Well, it's very interesting. There is a group of Conservatives, including in the House of Lords, who are suggesting that Theresa May should go for a customs union, because she's moved towards Labour when it comes to workers' rights and regulations. If she went to a customs union, there is probably a majority in the Commons for that, but it would, of course, break all her red lines.
Absolutely, and how she governs when this goes very much against everything that she set out to do, and the reputation in terms of our EU partners, but within the Conservative Party as well, leaves that open to question.
Just before we leave all of this, the position of the Speaker, if this change to the Commons rules takes place, presumably MPs of all parties will be slightly uneasy because governments won't have control of the agenda completely, and that could affect a future Labour government, for instance, as much as this Conservative one.
It would, and I think that you know, we're going to hear from Jeremy Corbyn later. There is this dilemma for Labour. They're going, you know, hell for leather now. I mean, they're actually preparing for a party political broadcast on Wednesday, going for an attempt to bring the government down.
But what is their Brexit policy?
Exactly,
one knows.
that is the question. And I think, you know, for people like me, who are a Labour activist member, I'm very aware of the next 60 or 70 seats we need to win are Leave seats. So what needs to happen is, and I think you will see it on the front pages, the Tories are splitting. This is fantastic news for those of us who think they're a bunch of basically sort of harsh, heartless clowns. But as they split, the opportunity arises for Labour to make a kind of, you know, cross-class, cross-party appeal to unite the country around something.
Yep.
We want to know what it is.
Which means she could possibly, with the threat of that and the fact that exactly the Conservative MPs are going to be faced with that possibility come early next week, she may just get that vote over the line. You just never know.
Impossible.
It's not impossible.
Still not impossible.
I mean,
and she will take credit
hindsight
for
productions,
that.
I can't believe what a mess. From the very beginning, with that clear mandate, the government should have noisily and openly said, we will prepare for a no deal on the basis that if we don't get the deal we want, we are ready for it. And yet here we are now, everybody's panicking
we've got
about
Stephen
no deal.
Barclay to talk to about that. Before we finish, Paul, you mentioned America. Katie, you've got a spread again in the Sunday Times about America, because if we think the executive's in some trouble in the UK, in America it's gone to an entirely different level.
Well, the correlation between the US and the UK right now is because if we head for a no-deal status and the Parliament decides that we would not allow the Chancellor to spend money and kind of cut down in terms of what they can do in terms of the budget, that's exactly what's going on in America right now. And there's a lovely piece in the Sunday Times which just says, overflowing bins, bears are moving out of the woods from national parks.
All across North London, bears are prowling out of Hampstead.
They're going through the bins and everything.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant example of what could happen if Parliament shuts down the ability to spend money over signing off a budget here in the UK. We're not going to have the bears syndrome, but
I think
possibly
they're brown bears. I think brown bears are vegetarian, aren't they?
Worse, they have a separation of powers. We don't. The will of the people in Britain is represented by the sovereign in Parliament, and we just you cannot have a situation where MPs, you know, neuter the finance bill. The government will collapse. I mean, people need to get ready for this government to collapse in office, and the last time is May 1940, and what happened was a coalition government. I hope we don't get one.
Or
we got Jeremy Corbyn into number 10.
Folks, you heard it here first. Thanks all very much indeed, and so to the weather. Unlike politics, it's been very boring. Over to Matt Taylor in the Weather Centre.
It certainly has, Andrew. Thank you very much. But I think sure many would rather that over the severe winter weather seen in Central and Eastern Europe at the moment. This morning, though, has been dull once again. Lots of cloud, outbreaks of rain still across parts of Northern Ireland, England and Wales. Brightening up across many northern areas. A few showers still expected towards the west and staying a bit drizzly across southern areas into the afternoon. But as I said, a lot more sunshine this afternoon. Strong and gusty winds, though, coming in from an increasingly northwesterly direction, bringing lots of showers to north and west Scotland throughout, but also dropping the temperatures here. We were around 8-9 degrees in Lerwick and Kirkwall earlier on. Later this afternoon, just 2 Celsius there in Lerwick. Wind chill of around -4. Staying milder, though, further south, but the cooler air will push its way southwards through tonight. Showers across parts of Scotland and then into eastern England later on. Many other areas, though, will stay dry, partly clear skies, and temperatures lower than through the weekend. Main chance of frost, though, reserved for parts of inland Scotland and certainly towards the far north. So a cooler day tomorrow. A few showers around in the morning through eastern counties of England. They will fade away. Most will have a dry day with some breaks in the cloud, a few sunny spells. Clouding over to the west later with some drizzle, western Scotland and Northern Ireland. And yes, temperatures down on today's vows. They will pick up again through Monday night and into Tuesday, but through the second half of the week, colder air will return to all of us. That's how it's looking. Back to you, Andrew.
So we've heard a lot already today about MPs in that slightly cant phrase, taking back control. But is it really possible? And what are the anti-Brexit forces up to? I'm joined by Sir Vince Cable, leader of the Liberal Democrats. Welcome, Sir Vince. Can I ask, first of all, is it, so far as you're concerned, true that rebel Tory MPs and others are working with the Speaker to take back control of the agenda of the House of Commons from the executive?
Well, it's not a conspiracy, but it is clearly happening, and we saw that demonstrated last week. And it's very clear that opinion in Parliament is crystallising. There is no support for the government's deal. There is absolutely no support for no deal. And then that leaves us with a more limited range of options.
Well, let me come on to those. But on the no-deal question, it's always been the case that although Parliament's against no deal, and that's clearly the case, Parliament's not able to do very much about it, or wasn't in the past, because no deal is in legislation, it's part of the law, and therefore you need to pass another law to stop it happening. And ordinary MPs can't initiate legislation. Is that what's now changing?
That is correct, but it is also very clear that no deal isn't something we just fall into. It is a choice of government. They can bring forward legislation to stop Article 50. Sir John Major was advocating that this morning, and it's clearly what should happen.
But if they don't, do you think backbenchers and opposition parties can now do that?
Yes, that's exactly what will happen, and that's exactly what we should be doing, because it would be absolutely outrageous and unforgivable if the chaotic circumstances of a no deal were allowed to happen. The government itself has demonstrated the folly and the dangers of going down this road, and it can't just allow it to happen by accident. So I think Parliament will take control of this process, will insist that we pursue the option of no Brexit. And it can happen in one of two ways. It can happen simply by cancelling Article 50, which I think would be resented by lots of people, or it can happen by Parliament saying, actually, we go back to the public to have the final say through a people's vote. I think that is now much more likely.
You suggested in the papers this morning that you are going to, under some circumstances, back Jeremy Corbyn in these debates and these votes. What would he need to do to win your support?
Well, we're not talking party political alignments with Jeremy Corbyn. I don't know where that comes from. But, you know, we do believe that he should come off the fence. He's played a very ambiguous role on Brexit. We don't know where the Labour Party is. He was wanting to deliver Brexit a few weeks ago, but we do think that he now has a key role, which I'm hoping he'll discuss with you later in this programme, where he could potentially change the game by coming firmly behind the idea of a people's vote. That's what most of his supporters and his MPs want, and with the other opposition parties and a large number of Conservatives, I think that's where we will get.
We'll certainly talk to him about that later on. But you talked earlier on about opinion crystallising in the House of Commons, and I just wonder how it's crystallising, because on the Remain side there's also been a big division between those people who are absolutely set on another referendum on the one hand, and those who are looking at what's called Norway Plus, in other words, Britain just staying inside the customs union and the single market in some form on the other. Is that division now beginning to end?
Well,
and in which
I don't
direction?
think of it really as a division. I mean, there are some people who are looking for that, as you wrote, Norway Compromise, which have many of the features of the European Union, but we're not actually members of it. I mean, the problem with that has always been, you know, why are we bothering to leave? I mean, we're still subject to all the rules and paying in cash and all of this kind of thing, freedom of movement, but we have no say over it. And I would be very surprised if that progresses very far. But, you know, there are clearly people who are striving to get a compromise, and that's but we're certainly not going down that road. I mean, we're very clear we do need to take this back to the public for the final say.
People are reading this morning about all sorts of furtive plots in the House of Commons and strange goings on in the cloakroom and the rest of it. Are you talking to cabinet ministers? Are you talking to the opposition directly, to Jeremy Corbyn directly?
Well, I'm certainly talking to cabinet ministers, other Conservatives and Labour and Nationalists, other parties, and it's absolutely right that we should do so. I mean, part of the problem which has bedeviled this whole issue is narrow party politics. I mean, the government approached this as an internal issue within the Conservative Party, and of course it's fallen apart. The Labour Party has also been divided. We're going to have to work across party boundaries, not just now, but to bring the country together at the end of it.
I talked about the clock ticking towards no deal. If we get to no deal and we go out with no deal, do you think we're going to see cabinet resignations at the beginning of the falling apart of the cabinet?
Well, we will see much more than that. I mean, some cabinet ministers are openly talking they will leave their party if this disaster is allowed to happen. I mean, let's be very clear about what the issue is here. I mean, we're potentially hundreds of thousands jobs at risk if we go through this. People are trivialising it with these, you know, glib phrases about WTO rules which don't really exist.
So do you think you're going to actually see Conservatives coming across the floor and joining the Liberal Democrats, for instance, as a result of this?
I don't know what they will do. I certainly believe that our party will be greatly strengthened as a result of this, but I'm not treating this as a party political game.
Which leads me to the final real conundrum in all of this story. Why is it the Liberal Democrats, as a fervently pro-Remain party in a country where there are many, many millions of people who want to stay inside the EU, are doing so badly. You're in single figures at the moment in the polls. What's going wrong?
Well, the dust hasn't settled on this whole Brexit issue, and when it does, people will make up their mind. There was a YouGov poll a week ago that suggested that if the Labour Party remain in their current position, our support will go up to 25%. Overtaking the Labour Party. This is reflected also on the ground. Every Thursday we have local by-elections. We're doing as well as that. I think when this settles in a few weeks' time, our position will come across as very much stronger than it appears to be.
Do you ever look in the mirror and think, do you know what, Sir Vince, you may be the problem?
Why am I the problem?
Well, I'm just wondering, because in a sense, you should be driving this. You should be on front pages all the time. You are an absolutely central part of this debate, and yet the Lib Dems are not cutting through.
No, it's not.
Maybe it's my fault, I don't know.
No, it's not a personal problem. I'm here talking to you. I'm going around the country speaking to rallies and leading the party. We've been in this position now for 8 years since the beginning of the coalition. We are rebuilding. Membership's very strong. We're doing well locally, and I think we will break through whoever is leading the party in a few years' time.
As ever, when we have you on, it's very nice to talk to you, Sir Vince. Thanks very much indeed. Stephen Barclay, the new Brexit Secretary, told us the last time he was on the show that it was 100% certain that that meaningful vote was going ahead in December. Now, a couple of days later, you may remember, exactly the opposite happened. Well, he's with me again now. Stephen Barclay, as I said, I asked you, 100% certain that this vote's going to go ahead in December, and you said yes, and it didn't. Were you misleading me and the people watching, or was it the case you simply didn't know what was going to happen?
No, that was the government position at the time. But
so you didn't know it was
going
to be reversed?
No, as I said, when we met, we were listening to colleagues. Those calls were going on during the course of the weekend. When we met for Cabinet, or we had a call for Cabinet on the Monday, that's when the decision was taken. So Sunday morning, that was the policy. But as I said then, we were listening to colleagues. And what's clear is that was the right decision to take, to postpone the day.
It may have been the right decision, but you did say it was 100% certain the vote would go ahead, and it didn't.
And I also said we were listening to colleagues, taking soundings from them, and that was reflected in the discussion that we had as a Cabinet on the Monday.
Now, I'm staring at your jacket because I'm rather hoping that there's a neatly folded piece of paper in your breast pocket or another pocket with Plan B written on it, and you can bring it out now and tell us what Plan B is.
Well, we're committed to the vote on Tuesday. There's still 3 days. Speaking with colleagues, we've seen from speeches in the House this week, whether it's senior Conservatives such as George Freeman, or whether senior Labour figures such as Jim Fitzpatrick, that there is some movement in the House, and our commitment is to. Well, we recognise that it is challenging. A lot of people rushed to judgment with the vote. What was a complex document, 585 pages of the withdrawal agreement. Some people rushed out within minutes to give their verdict on it. So we're working hard with colleagues, we're working hard with EU leaders. The Prime Minister has been speaking to them in terms of the specific concerns we've heard, particularly on the issue of the backstop.
But if you lose that vote, and most people think you will, there will have to be another plan, Plan B. Do you know what it is, and you're not telling me, or do you not know what it is?
Well, there is a process in place following that vote, if we were to lose it, in terms of the Prime Minister coming back to the House.
You must know,
and
surely.
But the issue is for Parliament and for members of Parliament is they face a choice on Tuesday between the certainty that the business community are looking for, that is good for our security, is good for citizens' rights. There's a lot in this deal that members of all sides of the House, well, there's a lot in this deal that members of the...
It's almost certainly going to be voted down. It might not be, but it's likely to be voted down, and the country has a right to know, if it's voted down, what the government's going to do next, and that's all I'm asking you.
Well, the country does have a right to know what members of Parliament are for, not just what they are against, and it's important that the House comes to a view as to what it can back. There's lots of different plans being put forward by members of Parliament that don't respect the referendum result, or that risk the risk of no deal, which will give not just Project Fear, which people say, but Project Reality in terms of real-term consequences.
I kind of
for
thought
the
you were
jobs of
pro no
constituents.
deal. In the end, if that's what it had to be, you'd go for no deal rather than any other option, wouldn't you?
Well, what I support is the deal that gives certainty, that responds to the concerns
But as I keep saying, that might fall. I'm asking what happens if it falls.
Well, it will be for the House to decide what it is able to support, and I suspect it will be along the lines of this deal, because this is the deal that delivers on what people like me, Brexiteers like me, campaigned for, whether that's control of our immigration, putting an end to the vast sums of money, taking control of fishing and agriculture. So this delivers for Brexiteers, but does so in a way that respects the needs of the business community. And MPs that vote for it will own the consequences of that.
As the man at the heart of this process, can you tell people watching, is it true, so far as you're aware, that there is a plot or a conspiracy, whatever you call it, going on inside the Parliament between the Speaker's office and senior Conservatives to wrest back control of the parliamentary agenda from the government? Is that true or not?
Well, I think
is
what
that happening
recent events have shown for Brexiteers like me... that
is it happening or not?
Well, if I may answer, recent events have shown with events over the last week, with what happened, for example, on the legal advice, where government was forced to act in a way that it didn't want to, is that the uncertainty in terms of what will happen in the House has increased. And so those on the Brexiteer side seeking ideological purity with the deal are risking Brexit because there is a growing risk that events could unfold in ways. So they're leaving the door ajar to ways that increase the risk to Brexit. And I think it's essential.
You're not offended by the role of the Speaker in all of this. He is doing his job defending the rights of parliamentarians and backbenchers against the executive, isn't he?
Well, I respect the role of the Speaker
and he's doing a good job.
And I was surprised, as many MPs were, by the decision this week, but I respect the Chair and we will operate with it. But the point for Brexiteers like me is that the risk that is posed by people in Parliament who stood, the vast majority stood on a manifesto to respect Brexit. Both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party manifestos said they would respect the referendum result. But it is self-evidently the case that the risk of Parliament acting in a way that frustrates what was the biggest vote in our history has increased. And I think this is a deal that delivers on the key asks of Brexiteers.
You've said that several times. Can I ask you also, as Brexit Secretary, we may end up with no deal. How well prepared are you?
Well, we're working extremely hard on that. Plans have been in place over the last 2 years. We have increased the tempo.
Let me ask you just a few questions in detail about that in that case. The National Audit Office says there are 12 computer systems that are absolutely critical to no deal. How many of them are up and running now?
Well, we have weekly meetings looking at all the key programmes.
The number of the 12, how many are
Well, if you let
running?
me come on to it. So the number of no-deal plans off track have actually improved. So there's been a 5% increase in terms of those that are on track. Well, I'm not going to get into every single programme, but the key issue is we are moving resource in Whitehall, we are stepping up our plans, we are engaging very actively on it.
The answer is 1 of the 12 are working so far, 11 of the 12 are not yet working. So that doesn't sound like we're ready.
No, there's a moving piece because this is happening in real time. We are moving resource in Whitehall
and in real time
we are stepping up our programme.
Portsmouth is set to be the relief port for Dover in terms of traffic coming across if there is no deal. Where are lorries going to queue and park waiting to get onto the Portsmouth docks?
Well, I've discussed this issue with Caroline Downage, who is one of the local MPs there, because that is part of... Well, these are issues that the Department for Transport have as part of their contingency and that they are working on. But the key issue is no one wants a no-deal scenario. It is the sort of issues that you're highlighting.
I'm going to ask you, what is the answer? Well, I have the answer here, according to the local relief plan, and the answer is the M3.
Well, there are contingencies. We've been testing these. You saw in the events last week, the Department for Transport are running a number of contingency plans. But what you're drawing attention to, the fact is that there will be challenges. There will be challenges in no deal.
Let me ask you one.
Well, if you let me finish, but this is the very essence of why we need to secure the Prime Minister's deal, because that is what will offer the certainty that businesses need.
Let me ask you one more. There are said to be 50 areas of legislation or pieces of legislation that need to be passed before no deal can work properly. We have 9 parliamentary weeks left to do that. Of those 50, how many are you confident getting through Parliament in that time?
Well, I don't accept actually that the figure is 50, but the reality is what you're drawing to is when people say that they're supremely relaxed about the consequence of no deal, there are risks to no deal. So we are doing all we can within government to manage those risks, but not all of those are things within our control, because often it's reliant on what businesses do, what other member states do. But the best way to manage the risks of no deal, or the best way to manage the risks of no deal, is actually to pass the Prime Minister's deal. And I think what you're alluding to...
We've got that message. I'm just trying to find out what happens otherwise. Can I ask you about Jaguar Land Rover, who announced 4,500 redundancies this week? Like lots of car manufacturers and other engineering companies, they're really worried about the effect of no deal on just-in-time delivery of their systems back and forth across the channel. What are you doing to reassure them? Have you spoken to Jaguar Land?
Well, the Business Secretary and others have been liaising very closely with them, and you're right in terms of the risks to the automotive sector. It's 1% of jobs in the UK are linked to that industry, yet less than half of their goods and supplies parts are actually sourced within the UK. So you're absolutely right in terms of the flow of goods is hugely important to them, but as they themselves said, there were many other reasons for the announcement we saw this week. It was to do with what is happening globally, what is happening in terms of those diesel cars. It wasn't down to Brexit, even if many of the stories presented it as a Brexit story.
Stephen Barclay, in terms of percentages, how confident are you this vote's going to go through your way?
Well, we're working very hard. I accept it is challenging, but there is movement in our direction. I'm not going to play a numbers game. It is challenging. We are working hard on it. And I think the clear message from the business community, from citizens who want the certainty, the clear message is that they want this deal. It delivers for Brexiteers like me, but does so in a way that protects the jobs of your viewers, and that is what matters.
Stephen Barclay, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Here is Joe Coburn with some details of special programmes coming up this week.
In the week that MPs vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal, as well as bringing you coverage on Politics Live every lunchtime, we'll be live from Westminster in the evenings to cover the build-up to the crucial vote and what happens next. That's Politics Live from 7 p.m. on BBC Two.
And my final guest today is the leader of the Labour Party, the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. Welcome, Mr. Corbyn.
Thank you.
Is there anything that Theresa May could do now that would give you her support?
Well, she's clearly lost the support of her own party in a lot of this, as well as the majority of people in this country on her deal. So it's kind of desperation stakes that she's in at the moment.
But she's reached out to Labour MPs on the issues of workers' rights and environmental and other regulations. You've said in the past that you would reach out to her in those circumstances.
Indeed.
I'm just wondering what she could do to win you over.
Indeed, I made that point in my speech to the Labour Party conference last year. The problem with her reaching out to the trade unions and others is, and I've spoken to a number of people that she's reached out to, is she offered nothing of any certainty in it. She just said Parliament would be able to consider changes in rights at work legislation, environmental and consumer protection in the future. That's not a guarantee of anything.
If she went a
little... And they've been rejected, by the way, by the TUC and all of the major unions.
If she went a little bit further, would you talk to her about this?
Well, it's not a question of talking to her, it's a question of her coming to Parliament and making a statement as to what the government's intentions are. The problem has been all through this process that Conservative MPs and the Tory government have actually been half interested in doing a deal with Donald Trump or somebody else rather than getting a comprehensive agreement with Europe. So we ended up with the Brexit agreement that she's put forward, which is obviously very damaging in the long run, both to rights in this country, to trade arrangements, and in particular to the situation in Northern Ireland.
So we're going to have the meaningful vote, we assume, this week on Tuesday.
Well, we're only having a meaningful vote because it was Labour that pressed this case very hard from the beginning. Remember, at the start of this process, all powers were going to be given to the Secretary of State.
We managed to
wrestle these things back into some degree of parliamentary accountability. So we're getting a meaningful vote.
So the vote's going to happen.
Yep.
If she loses that vote, as most people at the moment assume, they may be wrong, but if she does lose that vote, do you immediately put down a vote of no confidence in the government?
We will table a motion of no confidence in the government at a time of our choosing, but it's going to be soon, don't worry about that.
Barry Gardner's used the word immediately. That's why I'm getting overexcited, perhaps, but I'm assuming that you'll do it very quickly.
Andrew, don't get too excited about it. There's only 2 days to wait till the vote. I know it's your job, but it's 2 days to wait for the vote. We'll have the vote, and then you'll see what happens.
So you're not promising to put down a vote of confidence on Tuesday night or Wednesday morning?
You'll see what happens.
I certainly will.
I'm sure you'll be watching.
I certainly will. Let's jump ahead a little bit. Let's assume you do put down that vote of no confidence, and let's assume you win it. And we have a general election in this country, and you win that.
There is a process between that of a delay and then a second vote is put.
Well, I'm fast forwarding.
You're going very fast now.
You become Prime Minister in this country.
Well, hang on, we've got to have a general election first.
Let's talk about the election in that case. In that election, in Labour's manifesto, are you promising to deliver Brexit on your own terms, but to deliver Brexit?
Look, our manifesto will reflect on the reasons why people voted the way they did in 2016. People were very angry in those areas that voted leave. People were also very angry in those areas that voted remain. They actually have the same interests, as I was pointing out in my Wakefield speech on Thursday. We cannot ignore the fact that a lot of people in this country are very angry about their feeling of being left behind, lack of investment, poor quality jobs, lack of support on housing, health and all this.
It's also Brexit, isn't it?
Brexit is a key part of that as well. There are those in the Remain areas that want to live, quite rightly so, as I do, in an open, inclusive society which has open relations with the rest of the world. Others just feel very angry, and they didn't feel that the EU was delivering for them.
Clear question, clear answer. In your manifesto, will you be promising to deliver Brexit?
We have a manifesto commitment of 2017 which respect the result of the referendum. We had a comprehensive conference motion last year which included a number of events, which the first of which happens on Tuesday. Obviously, our process will decide exactly what goes in the manifesto as soon as we know an election's coming.
Well, that's very interesting, because you have this thing called the Clause 5 meeting, which involves all different parts of the Labour Party.
The Clause 5 meeting
together
is the bringing together of the National Executive of the party
decide what's
and
in
the
the
Shadow
manifesto.
Cabinet and a number of other people as well. It's a
decide
very
what's
big
in the manifesto.
It's a very big
moment.
meeting, actually.
And in that meeting, you don't, as leader of the Labour Party, have control over what happens. And given that nearly 80% of your own members...
I'm not a dictator.
Nearly 80% of your members want to either remain in the EU or want a second referendum. They will be able to outvote you in that meeting, and therefore you may not go into the next election committed to Brexit.
Well, it's assuming that I'm going to be outvoted, as you put it. The meeting doesn't actually take place in that sort of atmosphere. We have the conference motion of last year. We obviously have a whole lot of opinions.
But you're a listening man. You'll listen to your party, and you know what your party wants.
And that's why our conference motion said there was a series of views, which was the vote on May's deal, which was a motion of no confidence, which was a general election, and all options on the table, including a popular vote, another referendum, if those earlier events fail.
Yes. Come on to that in a moment. But, you know, we are at a moment of real crisis for the whole country.
Indeed we are.
Brexit is right in front of us, and you're suggesting an election right now. What I want to know is, what do you, as Labour leader, want to happen to Brexit if you win that election?
As a very minimum, a customs arrangement with the European Union that gives us a say of what goes on, but also avoids the whole issues of the problems of Northern Ireland, which this deal does. Secondly, access to the market, the single market, which is crucial, and as you were asking the Brexit Secretary earlier, job losses in Jaguar Land Rover and other places as a consequence of this. And thirdly, absolute
So you
legal...
are campaigning to leave?
Absolute legal protection of rights, consumer and environmental, and a guarantee that we're not going to allow British companies to fall behind European standards in order to entice in American investment in the NHS and all those kind of issues that you know I've felt very strongly about within the Labour Party.
You are campaigning to leave, but leave on your own terms.
We're campaigning.
You say no. What's wrong about?
No, hang on.
You are campaigning to leave.
What I'm saying is we're campaigning
to leave.
for a country that is brought together by investment. Well, hang on, Andrew, you laugh. Andrew, you laugh.
You are campaigning to leave. You're either campaigning to stay or to leave.
Can I finish? I'm very surprised you laugh about this. There are many people in this country are very, very angry about the way they've been treated in their different communities around the country. It's a Labour government, a Labour Party policy of investment that will help to reduce the differences and tensions within this country. Nothing this Tory government does will achieve that.
Well, let's look at your plan for leave, because you are campaigning to leave. Let's look at your plan
We're
for leaving.
We're campaigning for a customs union.
You've talked about a customs union, and you want a customs union, but an agreement which allows Britain to jointly negotiate global trade deals, yes?
What we would say is our customs union would be with the European Union, UK European Union, and we would want to have a say in those trade deals that are done. And I think that would be a reasonable position.
Have you spoken to anyone of any seniority or heft inside the EU who has suggested to you that that is possible?
I've spoken to many people of enormous heft, as you call it. I'm not sure what heft is, but I'll take your word for it. And they believe that the British government is unclear on what it's doing. They've had lots of problems with them. I've made it clear what our priorities are. We're not negotiating, we're speaking about what our views are. I've also got a pretty clear indication that in the event of a general election and a new government in Britain, they would obviously want there to be an opportunity for negotiations and time to do it.
What you want is not going to happen because it completely contradicts the fundamental laws of the EU. The Treaty of Rome, as amended, I can read you, says the Union shall have exclusive competence in the following areas. A, or number one, customs union. You're asking them to tear up the fundamental rules and laws of the EU in order to benefit you.
The EU is well known for its ability to be flexible, for its ability to delay things, and the arrangements it currently has, for example, with Norway, the example it has with Turkey and other countries. It is quite flexible on these matters. Now look, we are a very large economy. The EU is obviously a very large, even larger economy. About half of our trade is with Europe. It's actually in a lot of people's interests to maintain that level of trade and interaction. Just-in-time delivery goes both sides.
Looking at what's going on at the moment and saying the EU is not very flexible at all,
Well,
and you're persuaded you want them to go much further and tear up the Treaty of Rome,
No,
a
we're
crucial
not.
part of the Treaty of Rome to help the Labour Party.
No, we're not tearing up the Treaty of Rome any more than the EU wants to tear up the Treaty of Rome. What we're saying to the EU is this is the situation, the political situation in Britain, where we have a country that's divided on this issue. We want to bring them together. A trade arrangement with Europe helps to bring people together. I think they understand that. Listen,
Well,
you might understand, I'm sure you do.
It is
that
their founding treaty. It's kind of important to them.
There are reasons that people in this country voted leave in some very left-behind parts of the country. Exactly the same conditions apply. I've discussed this with Michel Barnier and many others in many parts of northern France and eastern Germany. They are very well aware of the feelings of many people in post-industrial areas who feel very angry at what they see as the inability of political elites all over Europe to respond to their needs and give hope to young people in those communities as well as in the metropolitan areas like London and Paris.
The next thing that you say that you want is the exact same benefits of EU membership as we have now, once we've left. Again, have you ever got anybody anywhere in the EU who has said to you that could happen?
Those words were actually uttered by
David Davis.
By David Davis
I know,
at the beginning.
But you owned them yourself and put them in your sixth test. So I ask you again, has anyone said that's possible?
By putting them into our own legislation, we haven't negotiated with the EU. We can't. We're not the government. We have met the European Union people on many occasions. Keir Starmer and myself have had many meetings with them, some jointly and some individually. I've also met many of the political leaders across Europe, particularly through the Party of European Socialists. So they're not unaware of our views, and they're not unsympathetic to what we are trying to get across as a political message. Look, people in Europe are...
Said to you or any of your colleagues that you could have the exact same benefits after leaving the EU?
We haven't discussed the exact same benefits. We've put forward...
When you do, they'll say no.
Well, have you got some hotline to the EU?
Well, no, I've just been reading the newspapers and reading what they say, and again they're against cherry picking, as they call it. They're against having your cake and eating it, as Boris Johnson called it. They don't allow the same benefits for non-members of the EU. It's pretty straightforward.
The opposite of cherry picking, it would be saying that we want to maintain those rights and conditions, which are very, very important. Because actually any company investing in Britain would need to know what its obligations would be to its workers, would also need to get a pretty clear message that a Labour government would not allow undercutting, would not allow a diminution in workers' rights, paternity and maternity leave, and all those very important issues.
You quoted Michel Barnier just now.
Yeah.
Here he is talking on the 6th of December 2016. Being a member of the European Union comes with rights and benefits. Third countries, that's now us, can never have the same rights and benefits. Never.
But it'd be up
That's
to
the man you're negotiating with.
No, but it'd be up to the third country to decide what rights and benefits it has within its own society.
Within its own, but not the same as the EU. You can't have the same access to EU markets and all the same benefits inside the EU as if you were a member.
I think you will find that when we get into serious negotiations as a government determined to have that good relationship with Europe, that there will be an ability to negotiate.
Let me ask you about another area, which is the free movement of people. Why are you against the free movement of people?
I'm not against the free movement of people. What I want to end is the undercutting of workers' rights and conditions, which has increasingly happened in some parts of Western Europe. And I did in the referendum actually make quite a lot about the whole issue of what's called the Posting of Workers Directive and that issue.
But in your own manifesto, not long ago, you said freedom of movement will end when we leave the European Union.
Because we
Why?
Because we would not be in the European Union. We would obviously have an immigration policy which would be based on the rights of people to move in
So would you
order
like to
to...
keep it?
in order to contribute to the economy here. And obviously what's happened with the uncertainty surrounding Brexit is that two things. One is many EU nationals feel deeply uncertain. We would unilaterally legislate straight away to guarantee them all permanent rights of residence in Britain, including the right of family reunion. The second is that many workers that are vital in this country to agriculture, to the care sector, to the NHS and to education have either left or are contemplating leaving. We have 100,000 vacancies in the NHS. Our economy relies on people coming in from other countries. I want to keep that.
It is in your gift right now to say that you would allow the free movement of people from the EU to continue after Brexit. It'd make it much easier to negotiate, and it's something you could say and you could do right now.
I think I've made it pretty clear the need for workers to go both ways. So obviously there's an awful lot of British workers that work in other parts of Europe. I meet them all the time, as I'm sure you do.
But you're not saying that you would allow free movement to continue.
What we're saying is that we would we'd want that migration to be able to take place. We'd want those conditions to take place. We would not be part of the European Union if we were outside it. So clearly that
But you could allow free movement as a non-member of the EU.
It will be open to negotiation, but the point has to be about the treatment of EU nationals in this country, which we would radically change straight away. Remember, Andy Burnham, proposed...
You can just say, we're going to end free movement. Why not?
Andy Burnham proposed straight after the referendum, guaranteeing rights of all EU nationals here. The government voted that down. They ignored the vote on Parliament and then opposed it.
I'm talking about you, not about the government. And I'm just saying, again, you could say we're going to allow free movement of people to continue after Brexit. You could say it now, it would be clear.
Diane Abbott has made it very clear. Our migration policy will be based on the needs and rights of people to work in this country just as much as British people to work overseas, and we will guarantee all those rights of EU nationals that are currently here and their rights of permanent residence and of family reunion.
You become Prime Minister in a couple of months' time. What's the first thing you do?
First thing we do, well, there's many first things to do, but one of them would obviously be to set up an immediate process of negotiation with the EU around the customs union, market access and protection of rights and privileges. But
and to do that, you have to extend Article 50, don't you?
Parallel with that would be a rapid programme on housing, on investment, on health, on social security, on education. Please understand the anger of so many people in this country at the way they feel the political elite and establishment has let them down and ignored their communities. It's Labour that will speak for them.
I think that's very clear to an awful lot of people. But can I ask you, would you extend Article 50? Do you think we, as a country now, we need to extend Article 50?
Clearly, if Theresa May's deal is voted down, and clearly if a general election takes place and a Labour government comes in, an election would take place, February, March time. Clearly, there's only a few weeks then between that and the leave date. There would have to be a time for those negotiations.
Now, maybe for the reasons you've given already, you seem very reluctant about the idea of another referendum. Can I ask you, if Theresa May's deal is voted down, if you don't get the general election you want, so we're into the new area, as described in the Labour composite motion from the conference, do you then go for a people's vote?
We're then into that consideration at that point, but we've got to go through these stages first.
What's your own view of that?
My own view is that I would rather get a negotiated deal now if we can to stop the danger of a no-deal exit from the EU on the 29th of March, which would be catastrophic for industry, catastrophic for trade, and the long-term effects of that would be huge. I think Parliament did vote for an amendment to the finance bill this week which indicated its opposition to no deal, but that isn't totally specific on it. We will do everything we can to prevent a no-deal exit.
If Theresa May came to you and said, you know what, in these extraordinary and unexpected circumstances, I've changed my mind, I want to stay in a customs union in perpetuity, what would you say to her? Would you
what
give
I'd
her your
say to
support?
Theresa May is that she spent the last 2.5 years on these negotiations with 3 Brexit secretaries. She cannot control her own cabinet, her own party, never mind the House of Commons. Surely when a government loses something so major as this vote on Tuesday, in normal circumstances, that would trigger a resignation of the government and a general election. Surely the people of this country have a right to decide who their members of parliament should be, who will be in government and who will be negotiating, and on what principles they'll be negotiating.
You've told us yourself that back in 1975 you voted against staying in the EU. Have you really changed your mind since then?
I've had a lot to do with the European Union since 1975, actually, on human rights issues, on environmental issues, and I did actually strongly support the social Europe idea. I'm a socialist. I want to see social justice all across Europe. I do understand the motives that people had when they voted both ways in the referendum. I campaigned for Remain and reform. I voted to remain so that we could be in the EU to reform it. I have concerns about competition policy.
What about the fundamental democratic issues?
I have concerns about issues of workers' rights. Obviously, I have concerns about those issues. But on human rights issues, I've made it very clear all the way through. We would maintain our support and membership for the European Convention on Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, which is only in part an EU institution, but also, which is not guaranteed in the government's future political arrangements document, we would sign up to the Charter of Fundamental Rights, because I do not want to see a diminution in human rights. Indeed, I want to lead a government that has human rights internationally as a core foreign policy.
At this stage, I'm slightly confused as to why Labour is going to be, as it were, enabling Brexit at the next election. But
well,
if I look back to you...
We will decide our manifesto content as soon as we know there's an election.
So that's still open. That's interesting. Jeremy Corbyn, 1996, at the Labour conference. The other issue is concern about democracy in Europe. You're talking about the EU here. We have a European bureaucracy totally unaccountable to anybody. Powers have gone from national parliaments. They haven't gone to the European Parliament. They've gone to the Commission. These are quite serious matters. Do you agree with yourself?
I made that point then, and I think an awful lot of people would actually share my concerns that there has to be greater democracy and greater accountability within the European Union. Our proposals were remain and reform. Remain and reform in order to deal with the issue of competitions policy to allow, and also for state aid to industry, but also the question of democracy and accountability within the... You've got to understand, people feel a bit uneasy about some aspects of that. Is there anything wrong in saying to any institution, maybe you need to look at yourself again? We do that all the time in Britain, don't we?
Sure, absolutely.
That's what your programme does every week.
In the same spirit, let me ask you about what's happened in Parliament at the moment and this idea that there is an agreement being struck between the Speaker and Conservative rebels which would allow the House of Commons, as the House of Commons, to take back control of its own timetable from the government, from the executive. First of all, do you think it's happening? And second, would you applaud it if it was happening?
I'm not sure it's happening in the way that you say, and I think the treatment the Speaker received from a number of MPs earlier this week was absolutely disgraceful.
Do you think he's been a good Speaker?
I think he's a very good Speaker, because what John Bercow has done is allowed far more time for debate and discussion by backbenchers in the House than any other Speaker I've ever known. I've been there since 1983. What he's also done, I think, is popularised Parliament and reached out in a very good way. This is a Speaker who visits schools and colleges and lots of community groups and talks to them about Parliament. I think he's somebody that's done a lot to open up Parliament in a very good way. And what he's trying to do is ensure that MPs on all sides of the House, both sides of the House, have a chance to take part and propose in this, propose amendments and so on in this whole Brexit process. I think John Bercow has been a good Speaker, and the attacks on him are really unfair and unwarranted.
Do you think he's trying to stop Brexit in any way?
No, what I think he's trying to do is ensure that Parliament has an absolute say in it, and he is religiously fair in his chairing of the parliamentary procedure. Look, he shuts me up as much as he shuts anybody else up. Isn't that the right thing to do?
We're told that...
No, don't answer that one.
I won't answer that one. We're told that it's possible that if this amendment goes through, it's being discussed, and MPs can grab control of the agenda back, and therefore they can put down legislation themselves. We could have legislation proposed by the House of Commons in the House of Commons. That is probably the only thing that could stop Article 50 or delay Article 50 being triggered.
The Dominic Grieve amendment only applies to this process. It doesn't apply in general to everything else in Parliament, and the passing of his amendment does mean there will be a change in the process in Parliament if this deal is voted down on Tuesday. But everything depends on Tuesday's vote.
Sure. Well, very briefly, would you welcome... Do you think this means that Parliament can actually stop Article 50 being triggered? Yes or no?
I think Parliament may well want to do that, but let's see what happens. But the crucial thing, Andrew, is Tuesday, and then, if this government can't control Parliament, it's time to move on and have a general election so the people can decide who they want to be their government.
Kind of thought you'd say that, Jeremy Corbyn. Thanks very much indeed. Now let's take a look at what's coming up straight after this programme.
The audience will be here later. The Big Questions has a new time slot, 11:30 on BBC One. This week we're in Birmingham, two very thought-provoking arguments. Is it right to design babies, and should museums give back other nations' treasures? See you at 11:30 on BBC One.
But we are almost out of time. Thanks to all my guests today. We leave you now with the Endelian String Quartet. They are celebrating the 40th anniversary with a series of 40 concerts around the world, including at the Wigmore Hall next Sunday. Here they are with part of Schubert's incomparable Death and the Maiden. Goodbye.
Thank you.